All right, today I'm going to review Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. So this book, it's a really short book. It reads really fast. It's not too long anyways. It's only a few hundred pages and a little over 200. And it's written by a journalist or a popular writer. He's written other books. I think he had a book on freediving. He's not a scientist. He's not a researcher, and I think that influences this book a lot. So I enjoyed the book a lot. It's all about breathing and how breathing affects health and how it affects our bodies and kind of how Western science has ignored it for a long time or gotten it wrong, and why ancient cultures like monks and stuff like that and yogis in India, why they've focused on breathing before and kind of what benefits that has. And he goes into a lot of different topics. It's kind of all over the place. It kind of makes sense when you read it, but he jumps around a lot. The closest book I could find to this book is the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. So in Matthew Walker's book, he focuses on sleeping, which is a big category of human life. So is breathing. And they kind of impact a huge amount of things in our lives. And so they both kind of try to tackle the subject of how this one bodily function impacts the way we live and how we operate and kind of our health and livelihood and all that kind of stuff. But these books really couldn't be more different in their approaches. Why We Sleep is written by someone who's spent a really long time in the research portion of sleep studies, and he's done a lot of actual science to try to discover what's happening in the brain when we sleep and what goes on in our bodies while we sleep. And he takes a very science-based approach to it, explaining, what's really happening at a very fundamental level within our bodies. In James Nestor's book, Breath, that's not the approach he takes. He does go into some science, but he usually starts with how Western science has got it wrong, what assumptions they've had, and then he goes through and he talks about the people who discovered new ways of doing things or new ways of thinking about breath. But it doesn't do a good job of really describing fundamentally what's happening in all the different bodily systems when we breathe, and how his recommendations in the book can affect all these different systems. So he has a lot of recommendations like don't breathe through your mouth, close your mouth when you breathe, all kinds of different things. And they have these breathing techniques where you can breathe really deeply or breathe in a certain rhythm and it will change certain things about your body. And he goes through all these, but the book focuses on his experiences kind of diving into the subject, because the book starts off and he's not very good at breathing and he has a lot of breathing problems. And then he goes in and he joins groups and he tries to figure out what's going on, and that leads him down a path of conducting studies. And the book kind of veers left and right, and he goes into different cultures and different traditions, and it's kind of all over the place. It's really engaging and interesting to read, but it's not very scientific. It's very narrative. It's the focus is the story of breathing. It's not really the science of breathing, because at the end of the book, you really don't have a great understanding of what's happening. You have a lot of concrete recommendations for what we should do differently and how you should act, and it has some breathing techniques at the end of the book, but it doesn't do a great job of explaining the science of why this stuff works or how it might work. For instance, there's these yogis who, through breathing techniques, can change the temperature in different fingers, and he goes through the science where they measured how this happened, so they know it was actually done and that these people could actually do that. But then there's absolutely no explanation for what mechanisms someone could use for changing the temperature between different fingers or different hands or different parts of your body, or raising the temperature of your body as a whole. It does a pretty poor job of explaining a lot of these fundamental science, or the science behind a lot of these fundamental mechanisms. So I was kind of disappointed on that front. Though because he's a journalist, it's understandable why he doesn't take that route. He's not really equipped to take that route. But when you compare this book against a book like Why We Sleep, it's really apparent that the author doesn't have that fundamental knowledge. Because a book like Why We Sleep is really great because it has concrete recommendations, but it also really goes into the science of why these recommendations work and like why these recommendations are what they are. And I felt like Breath didn't really have that at all. It's really interesting, and if you see him on a podcast, he's got a lot of interesting stories and histories of different things. But something was missing at the heart of the book. Like you get to the end of the book and you know what he's recommending, but you don't really have a good understanding of the science. So I don't know. For some people, I think it's probably good to read. I mean, just getting the message of shut your mouth and breathe through your nose is probably pretty important for a lot of people, especially people that suffer from like the facial deformities that come from chronic mouth breathing, which is one of the most interesting parts of the book is learning about that and kind of going through what happens to your body when you start breathing through your mouth all the time. So it's interesting. I think a lot of people will really enjoy this book, but just be aware that it's not a very scientific book. It's not very rigorous. It's not written by someone who has 30 years of experience in the science of what's going on in our bodies. And so when he's trying to explain something as complex as breath and how it affects the bodies, it takes a very top level approach and it focuses on like the people and that were involved in research and kind of what they found and what arguments were being made, but it doesn't do a great job of really communicating the fundamental science. So that kind of left me wanting a little bit. I wish there was another book that could fill the gap that this book didn't fill, but I don't really know if there is that book. If I come across it, I'll probably read it and review it. But so just be aware of kind of the limitations of this book. But it is interesting, and I did enjoy reading it. And I went hiking, and I made sure to never breathe through my mouth. And I was really surprised at how much energy I had during the hike. I think I got up the mountain quicker than I normally do. So there is some validity to the recommendations. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed with the lack of fundamental science in the book. So I hope you guys like this review. I've got more reviews coming soon. So like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.